The Rise of Money, a Darwinian Medicine Perspective. Hello. Today we're going to question everything we think we know about money. Expanding on Niall Ferguson's The Ascent of Money, we will come to feel that money is much more than a piece of paper in our pocket or an entry in our bank account. There is no currency. It was made. What you got ain't money. It's just a promissory note. Upon an NC, money wasn't created, but developed. It is a form-snatching power that has given life to many of humanity's greatest sagas, wars, revolutions, great waves of social and economic change. In this brief sojourn, we'll discover 6 new ways of seeing how money has evolved over time. 1. Opinion. Money is a relationship of trust, the invention of credit. When we think of the history of money, it's easy to imagine caves full of shiny gold coins, people bartering goods and services, or stacks of dollar bills. Yet, Ferguson is here to remind us that money at heart is not metal, but trust. The first and momentous revolution in finance was not the invention of currency, which presumably replaced barter, but the much more extraordinary innovation of credit. The earliest known banking is in the Temple of Babylon during the time of Babylonia, where merchants would leave their goods outside before forcing their way inside for what they were owed. This developed into modernized credit and debt. 14 ancient Egypt allowed temples and palaces to store money. Coins were first introduced as well, but didn't really catch on until much later, with James Stacey introducing minted coins to Mesopotamia around 900 BCE, who was a metal worker. But a clay tablet by far predates it all, containing account numbers and records next to them, as that's how much people used to remember instead of stick it up online. Money's most important role is not to carry value from one place to another, but as a sort of veterinary grain animal which allows value to be taken out of the future and injected into the restless, unsatisfiable womb-like present. Debt, or credit, is a promise of payment sometime in the future. This promise, this trust, is the very underpinning of finance. Bankers such as the Medici family in Renaissance Italy formalized this trust. They were more than vaults full of gold. They were a web of trust that took in different currencies and allowed merchants to pay their debts thousands of kilometers distant. A Florentine merchant could clear a debt in Venice via the Medici Bank, not because there was some exchange of physical money, but because 2 parties to a contract agreed on who they were happy owed what, and through guaranteeing this certainty, things were settled. Perspective gained. Money is really more of a concept than an object. At its core, it is a pact of trust and indebtedness between people and institutions. The numbers in your bank account are your confidence that they will give you the money when you want it. 2. Perspective. War is money. The bond market is born. How do states grow? How do they fund their fighting forces? There is more to the rise of great empires than we suspect. An overlooked force. State borrowing through bonds. For an innovative funding measure that would finance their interminable wars, the medieval Italian city-states struck a deal. These governments didn't expropriate their citizens. They borrowed from them in the form of loans called bonds, which came with a promise to repay a principal along with an interest rate. These were bonds that could be purchased and sold. The world's first bond market was born. The strength of a state was now not only measured by the size of its army, but also by whether it paid what it owed on time. The capstone of this system was the Rothschild family, which funded England's war effort in the Napoleonic Wars. With their network of agents, therefore, the Rothschilds could provide a large sum of money to an individual nation, which they could re-lend at usurious interest rates to a series of warring nations, and never need concern themselves over any default since they now own both sides. So they calculated the financial moves they made in investing on one side of a war would make them the most powerful family, and that's what it did. Horizon. Finance is the mother of political power. The strength and reputation of a country is directly tied to its capacity to borrow, meaning the financial health of that nation's bond market. Today, the war of nations is in more than just arms. It is also economic. 3. Perspective. Finance is the art of managing risk, inventing stocks. The great geographical discoveries and menaced overseas trade offered immense profits, but brought with them appalling perils. A merchant could lose his entire fortune if a ship wrecked. No one individual would take a risk so enormous. What was the solution? To share the risk. The world's first listed company was the Dutch East India Company, VOC, established in the 17th century. That company had solicited money from thousands of investors to back risky trade voyages with Asia. Each investor owned a part of the company, and they were held in proportion to how much money invested. That is, they held a share. In the case of success in the undertaking, they were entitled to a share of profits. If not, it was all that they had to lose. It was a new model in which the risk and capital were distributed across thousands of people. The stock market, located in Amsterdam, was a place for buying and selling these shares. But the system also showed a darker aspect of human psychology: irrational exuberance. There were times of madness when people traded things hot and cold because they thought it would make them richer by magic. The first bubbles to burst, like John Law's Mississippi bubble, showed how crazy and dangerous markets could be. Perspective on the stock market. The stock market is more than a mechanism for companies to raise money. It's akin to an enormous mirror reflecting society's dreams, fears, and anxieties about the future. Prices are not always rational. Human psychology matters as much as balance sheets. Perspective. The insurance era of finance in future uncertainty, decision-making. Life is unpredictable. Sickness, accidents, death, disasters. How can you deal with these risks? The material resolution to this question is insurance. The foundations of insurance as we know it today were laid in the Lloyd's Coffee House in London. London merchants and sea captains met there. In the meantime, 23 foreigners who were on board were kept at Caracal until their masters made good certain claims against them, and also paid customs duty on their goods to the due amount, otherwise they submitted to having their ships confiscated. They would pocket the premium if the ship returned safely. They would pay its value to the owner if it sank or was lost. This simple notion began to spread slowly to every other domain of life. We opened the lid on this and it poured out everywhere, Lane said. The concept of life insurance arose from a calculation by actuaries who determined the average human lifespan. This served as financial protection for a household if the primary wage earner died unexpectedly. This idea was broadened by states in the 20th century: unemployment insurance, pensions, healthcare. When you get right down to it, all of these are massive social insurance systems that spread the risks people face as individuals with the rest of society. Perception. Future potential disasters can be made affordable to us today in the form of a premium through financial instruments. Insurance is just another term for actuarial mathematics, where you put a price and sell the quantification of uncertainty. 5. Perspective. The dream of property. Whose is it really? In most Western societies, the middle-class dream is to own your home. So millions of people, how do they go about making the biggest investment of their life? The solution has to do with the mortgage system. A mortgage, for example, is when a bank loans you money to buy a house and uses the house as collateral on the loan. The system made property ownership very widespread, as people could get the asset they wanted without having to save up for it. As Ferguson helpfully explains, a wide array of citizens who are property owners is what gets you a vibrant polity, where democratic fence-sitters are become part and parcel, if only because they have a stake in the political system's continued existence. But there's a dark side to the system as well. They describe the 2008 global financial crisis as being the result of banks lending money to anyone they could lend it to. These subprime loans were then packaged into complex financial products and sold around the world, and the little spark mushroomed into a global fire. Mindset reframe. There is a way for money to be democratizing and inclusive, but if let alone, it also carries the systemic risks that can extinguish the wealth it generates. 6. View the global economy as a single organism, globalization, and chimerica. And today, finance is more complicated and international than ever before. A crisis in one country can be exported globally within seconds. At the heart of the contemporary global system, Ferguson locates the dynamic interaction between China and America, an economically codependent but still competitive relationship, which he has termed Chinesa. In this model, millions of Chinese save and make, and millions of Americans borrow to consume those cheap goods. China takes all its huge savings and pours them into American government bonds, enabling the American government to borrow and Americans to keep on consuming. This leads to a huge global imbalance in which one side is always saving and the other always consuming. And now, when you put a whole host of complex instruments, like hedge funds and derivatives, into this Rube Goldberg device, finance becomes a universe that collapses in on itself, unrelated to the real economy. Perspective shifted. The financial architecture we have now is a massive beast that goes beyond countries and is all interconnected by these invisible filaments that exist around the world. Although this mechanism is highly efficient at generating wealth, it carries significant risks as, being so fragile, it can threaten to destabilize the system. In conclusion, Niall Ferguson's The Ascent of Money is a reminder that money is never still. It is a living creature whose form may be determined by the wants and wishes of mankind. The long narrative of money is a quest for trust, passing from faith in precious metals to inconvertible fiat currency, which is a claim on the collective credibility. This history is important, not only from a historical perspective, but also if one wants to look at why the world operates today in the manner that it does, and potentially grasp what financial wins or opportunities may lie ahead tomorrow. More is coming, so don't forget to subscribe and like.